Hi everyone, welcome to my house. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm here because we're going to be baking and I figured this was the best place. Today we are making easy as pie cookies, which are basically little mini pies in cookie shapes. There are also instructions on your sheet if you would like to make this as a pie instead of as cookies. I've got everything I need here. I've got my cookie sheet ready to go with my parchment paper. I've got my cutter, all my little pieces. I've got my ingredients for my dough, and I have already made up, let's see if I can scoop some of this out. I've already made my pie filling because that's a really simple process. All you do is peel and chop your apples and mix it together with the other things. It's not tough to do. Neither, I will tell you a secret, pie crust is not super hard to do either. It just takes a few little tips and tricks, which we're gonna go over today. So, first things first, I've got my flour in my bowl already. I've measured that all out. And I'm going to add my salt to that. One of the important things to do with baking is to make sure that you're measuring pretty close to exactly, because baking is really scientific and you have to have the right proportions to make sure that things come out correctly. So I put my salt into my flour. I'm going to just stir it around a little bit so that it's all incorporated together. And now I have my butter and my shortening. I use a mix of the two together because butter adds like a really kind of rich, nice flavor and helps your dough brown. Shortening will make it light and flaky. It doesn't get as golden brown and delicious looking with the shortening. So I use so for the 3/4 cups of fat I need, I use a 1/2 cup of butter and a 1/4 cup of shortening. You can switch those if you want. If you want to do all butter, you can do that. Just watch out, it'll burn a little bit more easily. If you want to make it vegan, you can do all shortening. And for shortening, I use these cool little sticks that you can get at the grocery store. I like them because they have the measurements marked right on them. If you have Crisco that's in like a tub or shortening that's in a tub, you can use that too. Just scoop it out into your measuring cup and make sure that it's filling all the nooks and crannies and cut off the top. Easy peasy. Now, the other thing for dough that is really important for pie dough especially is to keep everything really cold. So I just pulled this bowl with my 2 fats in it out of the refrigerator, and I'm gonna not touch them with my hands as much as possible. Now what we wanna do so that we get like little flakes in our pie dough is we want to cut up our fat into small pieces and incorporate it. We don't want to do that with our fingers or hands though, because that will heat everything up. So if you have one of these jobbies in your house, that's called a pastry cutter, you can use that. You can also use just 2 regular old, don't play with knives, it's not safe. You can use 2 regular old table knives, and you just take them and you make an X, put them, whoop, that's why you don't play with things. Put them about a couple inches apart, and you're gonna go like this in your bowl, cross back and forth, and chop up all of this into little bits. Now, that takes a little bit longer than the pastry cutter, and I have the pastry cutter and it's easy for me, so I'm going to switch to my pastry cutter. pastry cutter, same deal. It's got these blades on it, and those break these up into smaller pieces. Now this is kind of a delicate balance. You want to chop at this stuff for long enough that your shortening or butter or both are in small enough pieces that you don't have big chunks, but you don't want to work with it for too long because that can make your dough tough. A good thing to look for is when your biggest chunks of butter or shortening are about the size of a pea, like a green pea that you'd see in your salad. That is when you should stop. And what these little pieces of fat will do, they'll help this all stick together. And what they do in the oven, there's like, speaking of oven, mine is ready. So what these will do in the oven is your fat will melt and that will release steam, and that makes little like pockets between your layer, little mini pockets between the layers of dough, so that you have really flaky, crispy pie dough. All right. In fact, the type of pastry we are making right now is sometimes called a flaky pastry. So there we go. I've chopped this, I think, just plenty. I'm gonna get all that out of the nooks and crannies of my cutter. And now for our final ingredient. Now, you might be wondering why I asked you to put your water in a bowl with some ice. This is the same idea as keeping your butter and your shortening in the fridge until it's time to use it. You want to keep everything as cold as possible, and keeping your bowl with some ice in it just helps it stay cold. You're gonna scoop out like a tablespoon at a time and put it into your bowl. The one thing you have to be careful of with this method is not to get an ice cube or a chunk of ice into your pie dough, because that will cause you some problems. Now, I know I said that we wanted to keep our hands out of this as much as possible. Now's the time to do it. The easiest way to stir this water in is to use your hands. If you're really against using your hands to do this, like if you don't like touching squishy stuff, you can absolutely use a spoon, but I think it's just easier. Get in there with your hands and squeeze it together. How much water you'll need to use, there's a range on your instruction sheet, and that is because it's going to depend on your flour, it's going to depend on the weather, it's going to depend on all kinds of stuff. So you want to add just enough water to kind of make this all stick together. You can kind of see my ball there. It'll stick together, it'll squish. It kind of crumbles a little bit, but it's not dry. But if I just pat it with my hand, I don't get goopy goo all over my hands. That is the perfect amount of water. You just want it to hold together, not be sticky. Now, I am going to take this for a bit and put it in the fridge so it can cool down again, because I've had my hands all over it. I usually recommend about half an hour at least in the fridge just to make sure it's really cold again. You can do that in the bowl it's in, or if you want to save some space, you can move it into a Ziploc bag. I am going to put this in there and clean up a little bit, and I will see you in a moment. All right, I am back. Our dough is chilled. I've got our filling here ready to go. You can kind of see, maybe, if you look in there, you can kind of see that the apples have kind of let out their juice, and that's mixed with the sugar and made kind of a syrupy, delicious goo in the bottom. We're gonna talk more about that in a minute. That's okay. That might have happened with your apples. That is just fine. All right, now let's roll. I have here, this is just a silicone mat. You can get this just about anywhere. I use this to roll on because it means that there's less of a mess on my counter to clean up later. It's gonna help keep things from sticking, but we also want some flour. So this is my big guy of flour. I'm just gonna use my scoop and sprinkle some out onto my mat, which is my cutting surface. I'm gonna put a little bit on my hand and then over my cutting surface so that the flour that falls off goes right back onto where I'm cutting, where I'm rolling. I'm gonna rub some flour onto my rolling pin. You can also roll it in the flour like that. Sprinkle, sprinkle. Then I'm gonna take my dough and I'm gonna break it in half, and I'm gonna break that half in half, and that quarter I'm gonna take, and I don't wanna mess around with it too much, but I'm gonna mash it into kind of a hockey puck type shape, and pat it in the flour on both sides and wipe that off, and that's just gonna give me a little bit of extra starter flour right on my dough. Pop that in the middle of my rolling space, and I'm gonna roll it out. While you're rolling, it's always a good idea to flip your dough around and over, because that lets you know that it's not sticking to your surface. Once it gets really big, you've got to stop doing that because you stop being able to lift it without ripping it. I'm gonna roll this out to about 1/8 of an inch thick. It doesn't have to be exact, it just has to be even. All right, got my cookie cutter, and I'm gonna wiggle that around in some of this flour I have for rolling out. And for each cookie I'm going to make, I need look at my floury hands. I need 2 shapes. I've got this heart here. You've got animal shapes in your bags. Those were the cookie cutters that I could get. If you want to use something that's a little bit more of a simple shape, that might work a little bit better for this particular project. If you have something like, I know there were flamingos in there that had long, thin legs, you're going to want to wrap those legs in foil before you bake them, because those are going to burn more quickly than the wide space. So let's cut these out, and I'm gonna put my cutter kind of as close to the edges and have as little extra as possible, because again, we want to keep those chunks that were in our dough that are going to give us those nice big flakes, we want to keep those intact. So you don't want to take your scraps and re-roll them out too many times. So you want to have as little scrap as possible. It's also just easier. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I need one more. Ta-da! All right. And then you can take the scraps and re-roll them. I'm gonna put mine off to the side and do all of my scrap pieces from all of my quarters at once when I re-roll. I think that's going to be better than mixing them in with the stuff I haven't rolled out yet. So, then you need your cookie sheet. Put your shapes onto your sheet. Half of them, I've gotten 10 out of this, so I'll put down 5 so far. And then you're going to take either your jam or your pre-made pie filling or your pie filling that you made, whichever one you went with. And you're gonna scoop a little bit into the center of each of your shapes. Probably, I need a smaller spoon. That spoon won't work. You wanna cover about 3/4 of your shape. And you want that last quarter to be around the outside. If you overfill it, they might explode, and you need to leave enough space around the outside to seal it shut. While you're scooping, what I usually do is stir to get the apples really coated in my goo, and then scoop off of the very top because you don't want to put extra goop into your pies because that can make them leak. It can make them kind of messy and wet. If you watch Great British Bake Off, you know they talk a lot about soggy bottoms when they talk about pastry. We don't want soggy bottoms. So, make sure you're not getting that. There we go. Oops, that one's got too much. That one's got way too much. We'll see how it goes. All right, gonna take my other halves and put them over the top here. And then I'm going to press down around the edges where I left it with no filling. And that is going to seal my cookies shut and make sure that the filling doesn't leak out. But this filling is going to create, oops, see, I overfilled that one and it got gooey all over the sheet. That's okay. This filling is going to create some steam when I cook these. So we need a way for that to escape that's not the bottom edge here. And to do that, finish putting these tops on. Alright. To do that, you need to cut little slits in the top layer of pastry. You don't want to cut all the way through. That will mean, you guessed it, leaking. That's no good. If these leak, they're going to stick to your cookie sheet. They're going to be really hard to get off. You can use a regular butter knife like we used to cut in our butter and fat while we were making this, or you can use a sharper knife if you want to do more details. Either way is fine. And you just put some little slits anywhere. If you have a shape that you feel like needs to be decorated a little bit, it's actually kind of cute to do decorations with your slits. When I make pies for Thanksgiving, I'll do my slits around my hand and make a hand turkey on the pie. That's always fun. If you've got a bird or something, you can add feathers or eyes. You just have to have enough slits to let that steam really escape. They have to be pretty big. So make sure you've got those. And then the last little bit, this is optional, but I think it's fun. I've got some cinnamon sugar mix here, and I'm just gonna sprinkle that a little bit, teeny tiny amount, on top of these cookies. And that will kind of bake on in the oven and make these really tasty. All right, and then you just repeat that with the rest of your dough. When you're all done, or when you have a full sheet, you put these in the oven at 375 for about 10 to 20 minutes. Again, it's gonna rely on your oven. It's gonna rely on how big your cookies are, how thick you rolled your dough, and a lot of other things. So keep an eye on them. When they're a nice goldy brown, that's when you'll take them out. So we're gonna have some new movie magic here. I'm gonna pop these in the oven and I'll show them to you when we're done. And now I'm up here. As you can see, our cookies are done. Mine got a little bit burnt on the edges, but they're still gonna be really delicious. Mine are too hot still to eat, but this is what you want them to look like, maybe a little bit less brown than this one here, but see that pretty goldy brown color you've got going on? That's what you want. So you would let those cool, and then you can eat them all by themselves or with some ice cream, whatever you want. And I hope you guys have very happy holidays, no matter what you celebrate. And I hope you enjoy your cookies, and I will see you next time.